Hey everybody. I just want to talk to you a little bit about some active reading strategies. What we're going to do is kind of talk through this slideshow presentation, talk a little bit about some strategies you could use when you're reading in this class to really be able to help boost comprehension. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of go through it, read through some of these slides, give you some points here, and then if you have any questions, come see me in my office hours, shoot me an email. We can plan to meet to talk through some more of this if there's anything you have questions about before we start jumping into some of the readings that we're doing this week. Oops, sorry, I went too far. My computer is being too fast. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is just really defining what this idea of active reading is. So for this class, we're going to be defining reading as an active process. And I know that seems a little silly, right? Because reading is an action. Yeah, it's something that we sit down, that we do, right? It's a verb. So it's one of those things that seems kind of like an obvious statement that reading is active. But I want to think about that a little bit different than how we would think about like reading for pleasure or just reading, a book while we're sitting on our couch or reading an article on our phones on Reddit or something like that, right? I think about that a little bit more as a passive process, as in you're kind of relaxed, you're just sitting back and you're not the same level of participant that you are when you're reading for academic purposes or you're reading for this class specifically. So I'm really going to talk through some strategies that I think that are going to be helpful, right? Some of these strategies you'll use quite a bit. Some of these strategies you may not use as much, but I'm going to be talking through some of them that hopefully you'll be able to adopt in your own reading processes and be able to use those this semester. Oop, I don't know why it lags when I try to share. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is this idea of previewing the text, right? So think about this the same way that you would when you watch a movie trailer before watching the movie, right? You get a context, meaning you have this general understanding of what you're about to read, or in the case of the movie trailer, what you're about to watch, right? You kind of don't know the whole thing, but you have some idea. You know what kind of movie it's about to be. You maybe know who some of the people are in the movie. You get an idea of like maybe the general plot of the movie, but you're not getting everything. The same thing can be happening when you're previewing a reading, right? When we're previewing through a reading, it'll help us build a context, meaning that you have some awareness for what you're about to get into. And this is really able to help boost your comprehension, because that general understanding, even before you start the actual reading process or the reading process as we know it of going through the pages of the book or the pages of the article, you're already kind of thinking about, here's what this passage is going to be focusing on, here's what this book's going to be focusing on, and that'll really help with that comprehension. So here's some things that you can do to help preview a text. One, read the title, right? I know that's like one of the most obvious statements ever, but titles are, in a lot of cases, the keys to being able to unlock a deep understanding of what a piece is about. And this can be true of articles, right? Like if you read through an article and maybe it gives you just the kind of point of what the article wants to make, or the writer wants to make in his or her article, is typically found in that title. But also when you're reading through books, right? Like think about the idea of, like, for example, this semester we're using Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. If he's titling his book Born a Crime, what is that key idea that he wants you to understand? And just really thinking about the title of something, thinking about, that first idea that a writer's presenting to you, that they're saying, overall, this is what the whole thing is about, that can be really, really helpful to unlock a deep understanding, or even like a critical understanding of what a piece is about. Also, if there's ever a word that's unfamiliar in the title of a piece, you really want to make sure that you're jumping into, a dictionary, Googling, whatever, to be able to find out the meaning of that word. And that can be incredibly important, because if you're missing one of those key ideas that's presented in the title, you might be missing, or you probably are going to be missing, right, this really big understanding of an overall piece. The next thing that you can do is Google the writer, right? To be able to find out something about the person's life who's writing the piece that you're reading can really give you a context for why they're writing it. And here's a big hint. These first two writers, they're writing from an autobiographical standpoint, meaning that they're writing about their life experiences, right? So to be able to know something about who they are can give you an understanding into why they're writing the things that they are. So let's say, for example, the first writer that we're going to be reading this week, Sherman Alexie, is going to write about his experiences in learning to read, right? And so when we think about that, just doing a quick little Google search on who Sherman Alexie is, and even reading like, his Wikipedia page, or just kind of that first little bit of information that pops up on him, can give you a context for why he's writing the piece that he is. Sometimes there's going to be what are called editor's introductions in a piece. Some of the stuff that I'm going to be giving you to read this semester is going to be copied from anthologies, which are collections of different readings. And often what will happen is an editor will come in before the author's piece that you're reading, and they'll talk you through, here's what this piece is about, here's when this writer was born, here's who this writer is, and here's a little bit of a context for what you're about to read. You're not always going to have these, but when you do have these, and we'll see several of these this semester, they're incredibly helpful to read. Also, read the back of the book, right? Like, I don't know, I think about that like as I'm scrolling through Netflix and I'm looking for something to watch, right? Like, there's that little summary, or we call it a synopsis, right, in literature. And all that means is just a short summary of what something is about. And so you usually find those on the back of a book in the same way that you would if you're scrolling through, Netflix, and you're just kind of reading, like, here's a quick overview of what this movie's about. Here's who's in this movie, or here's who's in this TV show. And again, that can help you have some context before you jump in and start reading something. So the next thing that I want to talk about, as soon as my slide advances, oh, I went too fast again, is make sure that you're reading with a pencil or a pen in your hand, right? This is that really important piece of that active reading process, is that you're taking part, right? That you're an active participant in your reading, right? So you should have a pen in your hand, you should have a pencil in your hand, because you want to be writing down things that are coming to mind. And I'm going to go over some different things that you might want to be writing down as you're engaged in the reading process. So what's really important is you should be writing directly on what you're reading. I know this semester is a little bit different, right? Because we're online. Usually I make physical copies of things and I hand them to students so you have the paper. But it's going to be totally up to you this semester. You could read from your computer if you want to. You could read from, an iPad or something like that if you want to, or if you want to, you could, and I'd probably recommend this, is you could just print up copies of the readings that I pass out, right? You don't have to. Like I said, you can totally do this from your computer. You could do it from an iPad, whatever it is that you're reading on. But what I would recommend is make sure that in whatever context you're reading this, you're able to make those annotations, right? You're able to write on something. And so that can come with, typing notes next to a PDF that you're reading. That can come with, depending on, what kind of tech you have, you can, jot notes down on a tablet, something like that. Or you can just go super old school. And if you, have access to be able to print it, you can just write on it with a pencil. So whatever that looks like for you, it's really important that you're actually able to write on the reading itself, because you want to make sure that your notes are where you need them, like where in the passage you're reading, they're right on top of the thing that you're reading. So here's some things that you want to keep in mind as you're reading through. One of the things that you want to do is that you want to make sure that you're defining new or unfamiliar vocabulary words. We're going to work on some vocabulary and context strategies this semester as we move into some readings that have some pretty big words, or we use that word verbose to be able to describe language that's like really big. So there are going to be some things that we read like that. Not a lot of it, but there are going to be those times where we're going to run across some completely new words or unfamiliar vocabulary words. I like to call those words fuzzy words. Those are kind of those words where it's like, I know what this means, but maybe I'm not 100% sure of what it means in this situation or in this context. So define those, right? Like, and it can just be as simple as like grabbing your phone and just Googling the word and having the definition pop up like that. The next thing that you want to do is this idea of talking to the text, right? This sounds like a goofy idea, that if you're just sitting there reading something at home and you're talking directly to the thing that you're reading. But what I mean by that is that think about reading as a discourse, right? Think about it as this back and forth relationship that you have with the writer. And, maybe the person you're reading has been dead for a long time. Maybe the person that you're reading you've never met before, whatever the case. And usually that's going to be true, right? but you want to think about it as you're engaged in a conversation with that person that you're reading. Maybe in the same way that if you might be like me, I'm kind of that annoying person sometimes to watch movies with, right? Because as I'm watching a movie, I'm kind of talking. I'm like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. Or what do you think that person's going to do, right? Like, I'm having reactions actively to the things that I'm watching. And the same thing can happen when you're reading. So here's things that you might want to write down. Let's say a writer presents an idea and you look at it and you're like, I completely disagree with what this writer is saying. You might want to write down, I disagree with this because whatever the reason is, right? Think about it the same way, like, you know, you might be on Twitter or you might be checking your Facebook or on Reddit and you could look at your phone and you could be like, oh, I don't buy that. You could just have that reaction to the things that you're reading. But you might have areas where you agree, where you think a writer is spot on with an idea and you want to write down the reason why. Another thing is a writer's experiences or what they're writing about can make you think about personal experiences. So this might be one of those instances where you say, like, you know, this reminds me of a time when I was in school and I felt this way because of whatever reason. It's just a really nice practice to start thinking about how you personally, your emotions, your feelings, your belief system on an issue can relate to a reader, whether it's through similarity, through differences, because one of the things that you're going to see is as we progress into our essays, the reading process is the beginning of the writing process, right? This semester, everything that I give you to write will be inspired by something that we read, right? And so really kind of thinking about like how we react to the things that we're reading gives us the opportunity to start like grinding those gears and getting those wheels spinning about how we're going to be incorporating those ideas and generating our own ideas for the essays that we're writing to come. So next, write down any questions you have as you're reading, right? This is really important that you're actually writing them down as you have those questions, because I don't know, I feel like our memories aren't that good, man. Especially now, we got a lot of stuff on our minds, right? Like, and there's so many times where like, I'll be reading something or watching something or have a question about something. And if I don't write it down, then a few minutes later, I forget it. So if you're reading through something, write down those questions on the reading. They might be really helpful for some of our group discussions that we have in the class. Or you might want to say, hey, this is a question that I have on this reading. And when Jose's having an office hour, I want to stop by and chat with him about it, or shoot me an email, or ask it in the Q&A section of our discussion posts. It's totally up to you, but I think it's really important that as you're reading through something, you're writing down questions that you have, right? Especially if the question that you have feels like gets in the way of comprehension of what you're reading. The next thing you want to think about is this idea, and we're going to practice this this week, but it's called golden lines, right? And golden lines are just those parts of a reading that you would think about as the same way you would like a favorite part of a song or a favorite part of a movie, right? Like that part where you're like, oh, watch this part right here. I love this part. Or, oh, listen to this. This sounds really good. Check out this part of this song, right? Like these are those moments where you think that there is an idea that a writer is presenting that is just tremendously important. Think about it as almost like a highlight reel for that thing that you're reading. So there might be moments where you're reading through a passage and there's this idea that this writer makes, and you're like, I love that idea. I mean, this might be the point where like, if that person was talking, like you would kind of like start clapping and like show that you're really engaged in what the writer is saying. Circle those, underline those, highlight those, whatever you want to do, but then also maybe kind of jot down a little note about why this idea stands out to you. What do you think is particularly important about this idea? And sometimes golden lines aren't just ideas that you think are great. They could be ideas that you read, you're like, this is a horrible idea, or this is bullshit what this writer has to say here, and here's why I think this is the case, right? So you might want to just also kind of circle that and just be like, here's this big idea this writer's presenting that I have a problem with. And it's one of those golden lines that I want to bring up in discussion. So next, take breaks when you're reading, right? This week, the readings that I'm giving you are relatively short, but there are going to be things that we read over the semester that are pretty big, right? We're going to be finishing a whole book, and I'm not going to try to overwhelm you with gigantic reading assignments, right? I think that the workload and you know the length of a lot of the assignments I'm going to be giving is pretty fair. If you ever feel like, you know, something that I'm giving you to read feels really long, or you know, it's a really difficult task or something like that, like please let me know and we'll talk through it and I'll make some adjustments. But for the most part, the stuff that we're going to be reading is going to be pretty manageable. However, I still think there are going to be those times where you want to take breaks, right? I mean, we have to do that with everything. I do that when I'm working on this class. I'll work, like this morning, I'm working for a couple hours and then I'm going to take a break for a couple hours. Then I'll come back to it, right? I think about this in the same way that I do about like being in shape, and think about it as analogous to running, right? If maybe, you're not somebody who runs regularly and I were to say, hey, go run 5 miles right now, right? That might be a really difficult task. But if I say, hey, over the course of a week, you're going to run a collective 5 miles, and maybe one day you're going to run, I don't know, half a mile, and one day you're going to run a mile, and one day you're going to run a tenth of a mile, or whatever the case is, over those 7 days, it's not going to be that difficult of a task, right? And think about the same way with reading. Think about instances where you can break it up a little bit and you say, you know what, maybe my reading assignment this week is I have to read, I don't know, 40 pages from Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. Maybe you're just going to sit down and for a half hour read through, 10 pages or however long it takes you, right? And then you're going to put it down and you're going to come back to it the next day and read a few more pages. I think this is a really important way to break it up so that you don't feel that you're getting burnt out on the reading process, right? For some people, it'll feel like, not as big of a deal to read through a lot of pages. For some people, it'll be more important to break it up. It really just depends on you personally and your own reading process. There's no right and wrong to this, right? For me, it also depends on what I'm reading. Some things I can sit down and I can read, for hours I could read something. Other things, I read them for a few minutes and I'm like, I need a break from this, right? It's the same thing with like watching a TV show. If it's one of my favorite shows, I could binge watch a show for an embarrassingly long period of time, right? But if it's other things, I can become bored really, really quick and feel like I need to do something else. So take a break, set yourself up. And I know everybody's schedule is different, and I know it might not be able to be that easy to be able to make a long chunk of time for yourself. But if you can find little moments to kind of like read a little bit, do something else, read a little bit, like that can be a really helpful process to get through a little bit of a longer reading. So read things again, right? Like this is another thing that's tremendously important. When I was reading through the student questionnaires, and I'm still finishing those up, like there were moments where people were talking about having to read something more than once and thinking about that as a deficit or as a weakness when it comes to reading. That's not true at all, right? Like one of the signs of being a strong reader or a sign of a strong reading strategy is to read through things more than once, right? When you're reading for this class, you're going to need to read through parts of a text multiple times to fully understand it, right? Think about that the same way you would as you're watching a movie, right? Like maybe the first time you watch a movie through, like I did that, I watched a whole TV show the first time by myself, and then I watched the second time with my wife because she didn't watch it the first time through. And when I was watching Game of Thrones the second time through, like I picked up on things that I had completely missed the first time through, right? Because the first time you're kind of looking at like a general understanding of something. As you start moving into the second read through of something, you're picking up kind of more like nuanced or smaller little details. And that can be the absolute same thing that's happening when you're reading through a passage, right? That rereading through things can really help you process some of the writer's ideas. Another thing that you might be able to find is you might find that maybe you found some new vocabulary, and when you read through it again, now that you have that full understanding of what those new vocabulary words, those concepts that writer introduces means, it'll unlock a completely different understanding or a deeper understanding of the text. So you're not going to need to reread absolutely everything, right? So don't think like I read my whole reading assignment and then I read it again. Some of this stuff is going to be simple, you'll understand it, and most of it's going to be that way the first time through reading it. But there might be those moments where it's like you read through a paragraph or you read through a few sentences or you read through a page or two and you might be like, I kind of get this, but I want to go back and I want to look at this again, right? So really think about how rereading through things can really help with boost that comprehension. Next, like talk through the reading with someone. This can seem like, I don't know, kind of another one of those silly ideas or those annoying ideas, but a really helpful way to be able to boost your comprehension is to be able to talk through something. So it's kind of like that idea, like if you know how to do something really well, a sign of that is that you can teach it, right? So like think about processes that you know really well. Think about whether it's a recipe that you know how to cook really well, or a sport you know how to play really well, or you know how to, I don't know, fix something on a computer. And if you can explain somebody how to do that and they're able to go through that process with you, then it really shows that you have a mastery of that process, right? And the same thing is true of like the things that we're reading. If you can talk through a reading with someone and fully explain a writer's ideas to somebody, then I think you have a pretty good grasp of what that writer is saying. So in this class, we're going to be having group discussions about our readings this semester, but I think it can be also helpful to do this with somebody who's not in our class, right? When I was in graduate school, like I would be doing a bunch of reading for, whatever classes I was in, reading a lot of these articles. And like, I remember one of the things that I would do was like explain to my wife what I was reading. I'm like, oh, I'm reading this article and here's what it's about. And this writer is arguing this, and here's some of the points they're making. And I'm pretty sure through most of the process, she was pretty bored by listening to me talk about it. But there would be times where she would ask follow-up questions like, well, why is this important for teaching? Or, do you agree with what this writer is saying? And whatever the case is. And just by me being able to fully explain those ideas to her showed that I had a good comprehension of what the writer was saying. If she asked me a follow-up question, I'm like, I don't really know. Maybe I had to go back and reread through that. So I think this can be really helpful. Maybe you want to talk to, I don't know, a family member or a friend or something like that. And just could be something as simple as like, I don't know, I could just go downstairs and I try to do this like with my kids when they're doing their homework. I'd be like, hey, what are you guys reading? Oh, what's it about? Oh, who's the character in the story that you're reading about? Oh, then what happened, right? Just kind of asking questions, maybe the same way that we would if we walked into a room where someone was watching TV and we said, oh, what are you watching? Oh, what's this movie about, right? And if you're able to explain those things, then you have a pretty good understanding of that. So think about maybe friends, family members, maybe other people in class that you want to chat to. And then also, anytime that you want to meet with me, come chat with me and we can talk through a reading. You can explain, key ideas to a reading through me. I'll ask you some follow-up questions, and that can be really helpful. So the last piece that I want to talk about for this active reading process is use my office hours. Most of the time that students use my office hours is when they want help with an essay, right? And that's great. Like, definitely come see me for that also. But office hours can be really helpful to work through readings. That was something that unfortunately took me quite a while to learn to do when I was in college. About, before, when I would go see a teacher in their office hour, it was simply like, I need help with this essay. I want you to read, some of this essay and tell me what you think about these ideas. But then I started using my teacher's office hours. I was having a really difficult time with a poem I was reading for one of my literature classes. And I went in and I sat down with the teacher and we talked through it. And it just completely opened up this new door of understanding that I didn't have before. So if you ever want to sit down and talk through a reading, right? We could talk about key ideas of readings. You can explain some points to readings, or we can read through some passages together, or I can kind of help explain some key ideas to a reading with you, right? Like, it's a really, really, I think, important use of office hours and important, conversation that we can have. Everything that we're going to write this semester, like I mentioned earlier, is built on the foundation of a set of readings, right? So those ideas that are going to be inspiring your essay are going to be coming from the things that we're reading. So I think it's really important that as you have questions on the readings, like, please let me know. I'll be checking in through like some discussions. We'll have some small reading assignments over the semester. But again, use my office hours. If there's times in my office hours that are published that don't work for you, no problem. Let me know, right? Like, shoot me an email, shoot me a text, right? And I'll be able to say, hey, you know what? Okay, you can't make it on Monday or Thursday mornings. But you're like, hey, Wednesday afternoon's good for me. If I'm free that day, absolutely, let's do it, right? I'll set up a Zoom meeting and then you and I can just jump in and we can look through a reading together. I can put the reading up on my screen like I have right now. We can look through passages together and we can really talk through it. So I just want to kind of give you that context for reading, right? This week, we're going to jump into our first couple readings. So really think about this. Remember, pencil in hand, right? Making notes. Later on in the upcoming weeks, I'll be modeling some annotations and we'll be doing some more of that practice together as we get into some more difficult readings. But for now, I just really want you kind of like jotting some notes, asking some questions, finding some new vocab, things like that as we're moving through the reading process. Again, if you have any questions at all, let me know. We can work through this together. And then, we'll start jumping into these readings.